I am making a logo blanket for the streamer Poison. His name is John, and he asked if I could make him a logo blanket of his snake. I am now starting, so we're going to start to knit. We're going to cast on 230 stitches, and this is the start of making the blanket. He's tall, therefore it's going to be a lot of rows. So let's get started on the knitting process of designing and knitting the blanket. So we did the designing aspect with the swatch. Now I'm going to go ahead and start knitting. We're casting on a lot here now. All right, so I have to get a big enough yarn. So I'm casting on 230 stitches. All right, so we need to make the yarn long enough. I need to make the yarn long enough because I'm going to be casting on 230 stitches. I might do a little longer, but that's okay. I don't want to run out. So 230. I'm using size 8 knitting needles, and I decided to use the 46-inch knitting needle. These are circular knitting needles. I'm using the long tail cast on method to cast on my stitches. So there's 2, 3, and I'm going to do the long tail cast on method for 230 stitches. 3, 4, 5. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and I'm going to do that all the way for 230 stitches, all the way across. 12, 30. So I just casted on 230 stitches for my logo blanket. So next is knitting the garter ridge, and then it's going to be knitting knit and purl in stockinette form. So for the first row of knitting, I'm going to recount my stitches to make sure I have 230, and I'm going to knit across for 11 rows. I am knitting row 1 of the blanket, and I'm going to just knit all the way across in a garter stitch, and I'm going to make sure I have 230 stitches casted on before I continue knitting row 2. All right, so just knit all the way across in a garter stitch. 1, 2, 29, and 30. I just knitted row 1. We have 230 stitches, the right amount of stitches that I casted on. Now I'm ready to start row 2. Row 2, I'm just knitting all the way across. So I'm going to knit all the way across, garter knit stitch for row 2. I'm just knitting to the end of the row, row 2, for the logo blanket, for the snake logo blanket. And now I'm going to knit all the way across for row 3, and I'm just continuing on making a garter stitch border for the blanket. So I'm going to go ahead and knit all the way across for row 3. Knit all the way to the end. And now I'm going to work on row 4. I'm continuing on the border on the bottom of the blanket. So I'm going to continue knitting for row 4 all the way across. Just knit all the way across. Garter knit stitch. Right, I'm knitting to the end of row 4, garter ridge, garter border for the blanket. Now I'm continuing to knit row 5, same thing, knitting garter ridge, garter stitch all the way across. So I'm just going to knit all the way across for row 5, all the way to the end. I'm just knitting to the end of row 5, garter knit stitch for the border of the blanket, for the logo blanket. Now I'm going to start knitting row 6, garter knit stitch all the way across, continue knitting the border for the blanket. I'm knitting all the way across to the end. I'm knitting the last stitches of row 6, just knitting it up all the way to the end. And now I'm going to start row 7 for my garter ridge for the blanket. Knitting row 7, garter stitch all the way across for my border. I'm knitting to the end of row 7, garter knit stitch, still working on the border for the blanket. Now I'm going to knit all the way across number 8. Just knit all the way across, and we're continuing to knit the border on the blanket, the bottom of the blanket for the logo blanket. Just knit all the way across. I'm just finishing row 8, knitting to the end. Now I'm going to start row 9, knit all the way across for the garter border. Just knitting all the way across for the blanket. I'm knitting to the end of row 9 for the garter border of the logo blanket. And now I'm going to continue to knit the border. I'm on row 10, so I'm just going to knit all the way across for the border of the blanket, row 10. Knit all the way across. All right, I'm going to call it. I worked on it for 2 hours. I'm row 10 of the garter knit stitch. All right, so I've knitted the garter ridge. This is 10 rows. I still have another row to go, but I'm going to call it for today. And I started this by casting on along with knitting part of the border of the blanket, and it has taken me 2 hours to knit this up so far. And this is just the garter border of the blanket. I'll be back another time to knit more.